I sent a message in the family group chat that said, "Court hearing at 3 p.m. Can someone come?" I had been fighting a case for months, a case that nearly broke me. My brother replied, "We're at the beach." My mom didn't even hesitate. She wrote, "Don't count on us." I stared at the screen for a second, feeling the familiar tightness in my chest, then just typed back, "No worries." What else was there to say? I walked into that courtroom alone, holding a binder that had become my entire life. I wasn't expecting support. I wasn't expecting applause. I just wanted one of them to be there, not for the fight, but for the finish. Instead, they chose sandcastles and sun hats over a courtroom seat. But here's the part I didn't expect. Halfway through the hearing, the back door opened. I didn't look. I didn't need to. I could feel them sit down. I could feel the shift in the air when the judge said something that made the entire courtroom still. And then came the sentence that made them jerk upright, mouths parted, faces stunned. What they heard in that courtroom forced them to see what I had been trying to tell them for years, and this time, no one could say I was overreacting. I used to believe that if you worked hard, stayed quiet, and followed the rules, the people around you would treat you fairly. That belief was the first thing to break. My name is Isla Morton. I'm 31 years old, and until last year, I worked as a senior legal assistant at a boutique law firm in downtown Portland called Rayner & Cole. From the outside, the firm looked polished. Glass offices, expensive espresso machines, a marble lobby that made clients feel important. Inside, it was something else entirely. Denholm Rayner, the founding partner, was charming to clients, generous to senior partners, and cruel to everyone beneath him. I saw it all from my desk, and over the years, I learned to absorb it. The inappropriate jokes, the subtle threats, the long silences after I gave honest feedback. He once told me my promotion was on hold because I didn't have the right personality for leadership. When I asked what that meant, he leaned closer and said, "You're not warm. You're not pliable." It was the kind of insult that didn't make sense out loud, but it lived under my skin for weeks. I stayed. I told myself it was just how the legal world worked. I needed the paycheck. I needed the experience. I wanted to believe I was building something. But the truth was I stayed because I didn't think I had anywhere else to go. My family wasn't the type to offer backup. My mom, Roxanne, has always believed strength means swallowing discomfort. She prides herself on getting on with things, no matter how unfair. My dad, Grady, follows her lead. Quiet, loyal, and rarely takes sides unless pressed. My older brother Trey is loud, self-assured, and always ready with a sarcastic jab. I used to think we were just different, but somewhere along the way, I stopped expecting them to show up for me. I told my mom about the harassment at work once, during a family barbecue. She was flipping burgers on the patio and barely looked up. "You always take things so seriously," she said. "You should learn to laugh things off. Men like him lose interest when you stop reacting." I remember staring at the grill and thinking, so this is what support looks like in my family. Trey laughed when I mentioned I was thinking about filing a complaint. "Isla, you don't go to war with your employer. You're not built for that kind of heat," he said, like he was talking about the weather. That was the moment I stopped talking to them about work. Things at the firm got worse. One of the junior paralegals, Hannah, left after just 3 months. She never said why, but I had a feeling. Another woman left quietly after a team dinner. I overheard her crying in the restroom the week before she packed up. We all knew the pattern. The firm didn't fire women outright. They just made staying unbearable. When I discovered billing irregularities, clients being charged for services that didn't exist, I brought it up to Denholm in private. He smiled like I was a child interrupting a grown-up conversation. "You're loyal, Isla," he said. "Let's not make this more complicated than it needs to be." The next day, I was called into HR, a formal write-up. Unprofessional conduct, they said. 2 weeks later, I was terminated. No severance. No chance to say goodbye to the team I'd helped train. I went home that day and sat in my car for over an hour. I didn't cry, I didn't scream. I opened my laptop and I started documenting everything. I knew I had a case. Wrongful termination, retaliation. I also knew no one would fight it for me. So I decided I'd fight it myself. I spent the next 6 months collecting evidence. I built a timeline. I contacted former employees, requested public filings, and found inconsistencies in the firm's financials. I spent nights reading through case law, days organizing exhibits, weekends preparing statements. I took a job as a part-time receptionist to cover bills and bought secondhand textbooks to brush up on trial procedure. And still, I didn't tell my family. I didn't want their opinions. I didn't want their warnings. I wanted to win, not defend my right to even try. 2 days before the hearing, I told them, a simple message in the group chat, "Court hearing Tuesday at 3 p.m. Can someone come?" No explanation, no plea for help, just the facts. Trey replied within minutes, "We're at the beach all week. Didn't know you were still doing that. Good luck, though." Mom wrote a few hours later, "Don't count on us. We already said it's not worth it." Dad saw the message but didn't respond. He never does when things are tense. I stared at my phone for a while, thumb hovering over the keyboard. Then I typed, "No worries." It was easier to let it go than to explain why it mattered. Easier to walk in alone than to walk in with people who didn't believe I belonged there in the first place. That Tuesday, I walked into the Multnomah County Courthouse carrying 2 bags, one with evidence, the other with everything they said I couldn't do. I adjusted my blazer, looked straight ahead, and took my seat across from the man who had tried to erase me. I didn't know if my family would show up. I didn't care anymore. I had already decided, this time, I'd speak loud enough that none of them could pretend they didn't hear me. The courtroom felt colder than I expected, not physically, but in the way that makes your skin tighten and your breath feel shallow. I took a seat at the plaintiff's table, placed my binder in front of me, and locked my hands together to stop them from shaking. Across the aisle, Denholm Rayner leaned back in his chair, perfectly relaxed. His attorney, some sharp-looking man in a tailored suit, glanced over at me with a flicker of amusement, like I was a curiosity instead of a threat. They hadn't expected me to represent myself. They definitely hadn't expected me to come this prepared. The judge entered, and the hearing began. It started slowly. Procedural motions, questions of admissibility, tone setting. I kept my voice steady, my posture straight, my answers clear. I had rehearsed all of it dozens of times alone in my apartment, pacing between the couch and the kitchen counter, pretending the fridge was the judge and the sink was the defense attorney. What I hadn't rehearsed was the feeling of sitting in front of the man who made my life unbearable for 3 years, acting like none of it mattered. Denholm sat with his hands clasped calmly in his lap, expression neutral. Not a single trace of guilt or worry. That was what burned the most. Not just the things he did, but the ease with which he moved on from them. I began presenting my case. I showed emails where Denholm questioned my emotional stamina and said I was unfit for leadership. I played a voicemail where he told me to lighten up after I raised concerns about his behavior. I presented time logs, financial statements, and HR correspondence that showed a clear timeline. I confronted him about billing irregularities, and within 2 weeks, I was fired. The defense objected repeatedly. They called my evidence subjective and taken out of context. But the more they interrupted, the more clearly I spoke. The judge listened, watched, and asked his own questions. Most of them pointed at Denholm. The courtroom wasn't packed, but there were a few observers. I didn't look at them. I didn't want to know if anyone familiar had walked in. I had prepared for silence. I had prepared for being alone. Still, there was a shift in the room about halfway through, a creak of the door, the faint rustle of movement behind me. I knew it instantly. I didn't have to turn. My mother always wore heels that clicked twice with each step. My brother's voice always had that slight nasal quality when he whispered. I heard both. I said nothing. I kept reading from my notes. The defense brought up my performance reviews, trying to prove that I had been on thin ice before any of this began. They showed an email from Denholm saying I had difficulty adapting to feedback. I countered with a glowing peer review from the same month, written by a senior associate who had since left the firm. "You cherry-picked one paragraph," I told the attorney. "Here's the full version." I passed it to the clerk. The judge read it aloud. Ms. Morton is one of the most reliable and ethical team members I've worked with. Her refusal to compromise integrity, even under pressure, is rare and deeply respected. The defense attorney didn't have much to say after that. Denholm still hadn't spoken. He looked bored. That was his tactic. Disinterest. To make me feel small by acting like none of this touched him. But his fingers twitched when I mentioned Hannah Truell's name. She had worked at the firm for 3 months before resigning without warning. I had tracked her down and asked if she'd write a statement. She had. In it, she described Denholm's comments, his threats, his tendency to corner her in private. "She's not here to testify," the defense snapped. "No," I said, "but the patterns match." I felt myself gaining ground, not in the sense of winning. This wasn't a movie, but I was making it harder for them to paint me as unstable or bitter. Every document I submitted, every argument I made, chipped away at the image Denholm had built. Still, I could feel the weight of my family's presence behind me. I wondered what they were thinking, if Trey was checking his phone, if my mother was pursing her lips the way she always did when she thought someone was being dramatic. I wanted to turn around and say, "This is why I didn't tell you." But I stayed forward. I stayed focused. The tension rose with each passing hour. The judge took notes, asked more questions, pressed the defense for clarification. There was a moment, brief but undeniable, when Denholm's attorney looked at him with a flicker of doubt, like he was beginning to realize this wasn't going to be the open and shut dismissal they had expected. I ended my presentation with the summary timeline, charting every key incident from the last 2 years: dates, emails, disciplinary action, firing, filed complaint. And then I handed the clerk a printed transcript of a conversation I had recorded months before I left. In it, Denholm joked to another partner about how easy it was to pressure out employees who became a problem. "You just give them enough rope," he said. "They hang themselves with emotion." I watched the judge's eyes tighten as he read those words. The silence that followed was louder than any outburst. I sat down, heart pounding. For the first time all day, I allowed myself to breathe. That's when I finally looked behind me. My mother's eyes were fixed on the judge. Trey looked stunned. My dad's hands were clenched in his lap. They had come, but they weren't there for me. They were witnesses now, witnesses to a truth they had spent years ignoring. And I wasn't done yet. As I sat down after presenting my evidence, I looked at the judge briefly and then turned back to my binder. My hands were trembling slightly, but not from fear anymore. I was ready. I had one final move left. The court recessed for lunch, and I remained seated while the others exited. Denholm's team filed out, heads down, whispering. My family lingered in the gallery. I could feel their eyes on me, but I didn't look. I organized my papers, double-checked my exhibits, and pulled out a sealed manila envelope from the bottom of my case. On the front, I had written in neat black letters, "Supplemental evidence, former employee testimonies." Inside were 3 affidavits, detailed, specific, and painful to read. Each one was signed and notarized. Each one described Denholm's behavior in different contexts, but with the same pattern. One of them, from a woman named Maya Kendry, included an accusation of inappropriate touching. She hadn't gone public, but she had sent me her statement with a handwritten note that said, "Even if I can't fight him, maybe you can." I had debated whether to include these. I wasn't sure if the court would allow it so late in the hearing, but something shifted in me during that morning session. I saw the way Denholm smirked when his lawyer spoke on his behalf. I saw how his expression stayed blank while the judge read the voicemail transcripts aloud. He didn't think I could do anything that would truly shake him. So I made a decision. I would not protect him with my silence. When court resumed, the judge asked if I had any final additions before closing arguments. I stood up, walked to the clerk's desk, and handed her the envelope. "I have new material that supports a pattern of conduct consistent with my complaint," I said. 3 former employees submitted these statements voluntarily after learning of my case. I'd like the court to consider them under Rule 406. The defense attorney stood up immediately. "Your Honor, this is unorthodox. These individuals are not present, and the timing is highly suspect." The judge held up a hand without looking at him. He flipped open the envelope and started reading the first page. The courtroom was silent. I looked over at Denholm. He was no longer leaning back. He had stiffened, his jaw tight. His attorney leaned over and whispered something, but Denholm didn't nod. His eyes were fixed on the judge. After several minutes, the judge looked up. These statements are consistent with the plaintiff's original claim and speak directly to the character of the defendant's professional behavior. They will be admitted into the record. The defense attorney looked rattled. Your Honor, that's final, the judge said. The air shifted. I returned to my seat, steady now, my breathing calm. For the first time since this began, I felt like I had taken control of the room. Denholm's mask had cracked. I saw it in the way he rubbed his palms together and stared at the table. His confidence was unraveling thread by thread. Closing arguments began and the defense went first. His lawyer spoke quickly, his tone sharper than before. He painted me as emotional, retaliatory, someone who couldn't handle high-pressure environments. He said I was cherry-picking statements and building a case around isolated moments. He referenced my lack of formal legal training, called this a crusade without merit. I didn't flinch. When it was my turn, I stood slowly. I didn't bring my binder to the podium. I didn't need it. I'm not here because I was too sensitive, I began. I'm here because I knew what happened to me was wrong. I knew it when I was fired without explanation, and I knew it when I stayed up every night building this case while working 2 jobs. I didn't come to this court to destroy anyone. I came because I deserve the right to work without fear. I came because every woman who wrote those statements deserves to be heard. And I came because silence is how people like him get away with it. I paused only for a moment before continuing. I may not have a law degree, but I know the law. I've lived the consequences of someone who thought he was above it. This isn't about revenge, it's about truth, and it's about accountability. I ended my statement, thanked the court, and returned to my seat. The judge didn't speak right away. He sat with his fingers steepled beneath his chin, eyes fixed on Denholm. When he finally spoke, his voice was measured, but firm. This court has reviewed the materials submitted, including supplemental testimonies. The consistency across multiple accounts reflects not only a pattern of misconduct, but a deliberate abuse of authority. He turned to Denholm. Mr. Rayner, this is not just a personnel issue. This is a violation of ethical standards, legal standards, and basic human decency. I could hear my mother shift in her seat behind me. I could feel Trey's eyes on the back of my head. I didn't move. The Judge Conti. The hallway outside the courtroom was still. I stood by the large windows, light flooding in from the gray Portland sky. I could see my reflection in the glass, shoulders squared, chin lifted, face calm. I didn't look like someone who had just gone to war. I looked like someone who had survived it. A court officer approached and told me the judge had finalized his ruling. I nodded and followed him back into the courtroom. My footsteps echoed on the polished tile. The gallery was nearly empty now. My family was still there. My mother sat with her arms folded tightly across her chest. Trey leaned forward, elbows on his knees. My father rested one hand over his mouth, not speaking, not blinking. Denholm and his attorney were seated again, stiff and quiet. I took my place. The judge re-entered, placed a hand on the bench, and began to speak. After reviewing all evidence, including oral testimony, written affidavits, and the exhibits entered into the record, this court finds in favor of the plaintiff, Ms. Isla Morton. I felt the breath leave my body, but I stayed still. The defendant, Mr. Denholm Rayner, is found liable for wrongful termination in retaliation for a protected workplace complaint in violation of Oregon state labor statutes. Denholm stared at the table in front of him. His attorney showed no reaction, only scribbled something in his notes. The court orders compensatory damages in the amount of $185,000 for lost wages, emotional distress, and legal expenses incurred. In addition, this court is submitting a formal censure of the defendant's firm to the Oregon State Bar for review of ethical conduct violations. My hands rested on the table. I didn't move. I didn't smile. I listened. The judge turned toward me. Ms. Morton, your documentation, composure, and persistence reflect an extraordinary understanding of the legal system and a level of preparation rarely seen in self-representation. You demonstrated integrity and strength under pressure. I glanced behind me. My mother was blinking rapidly. Trey leaned back in his chair, stunned. My father's expression had shifted. There was something new in his eyes. Not pride, not yet, but maybe a flicker of recognition. The judge continued. This case will be referenced as an example of how institutional power, when left unchecked, can be held accountable by individual courage. This hearing is now adjourned. The gavel came down, sharp, final. For a moment, no one moved. Then Denholm pushed back his chair and walked out without a word. His attorney followed. I stood slowly, gathered my documents, and zipped up my bag. I turned and faced my family for the first time since the verdict. My mother was the first to speak. "You should have told us it was this serious." Her voice was hushed, flat. I met her gaze and answered without hesitation. "I did. You just didn't want to believe it." Trey opened his mouth, then closed it again. My father stood like he wanted to say something, but didn't know where to begin. I didn't wait. I walked down the aisle and toward the exit, my heels striking the floor in rhythm with my heartbeat. Each step felt heavier than the last, not from burden, but from release. Years of being underestimated had lifted. Years of being spoken over, dismissed, quietly pitied. They had ended right here. In the lobby, a woman approached me. She was in her late 40s, blazer in one hand, laptop bag over her shoulder. I didn't recognize her. "Are you Isla?" she asked. I nodded. "I was in the back of the courtroom earlier," she said. "I worked for Denholm 8 years ago. I just wanted to say thank you. What you did today, what you said, it mattered." I thanked her quietly. She nodded once and left. I stepped out into the cool afternoon. The breeze felt sharp against my face, but I welcomed it. It woke me up, kept me present. I walked a few blocks to my car, keys clutched tightly in my hand, feeling the weight of the moment settle in. I got in, closed the door, and sat still for a long time. Not crying, not smiling, just breathing. Later that night, I received a message from one of the women who had given me an affidavit. It read, "I heard what happened. I'm proud of you. You spoke for all of us." I didn't reply right away. I just stared at the screen, holding the phone in both hands, overwhelmed by the truth of it. I never wanted to be the voice for anyone. I just wanted to stop pretending things were fine. But maybe that was enough. Later that week, I received an official email from the Oregon Bar confirming that Denholm Rayner was under investigation for multiple complaints, not just mine. Others had come forward. My case had opened the door. I didn't post about the ruling online. I didn't celebrate with champagne or make some grand announcement. I went back to my apartment, cleaned up my living room, and opened my study books. The bar exam was 4 months away. I set a new calendar alert in my phone, just a quiet reminder. You started this. You finish it. And I would. Not because I needed to prove anything to them anymore, but because I finally knew I was capable. A month after the verdict, I walked into a bookstore near my apartment and bought a brand new set of bar prep books. I used part of the court settlement to register for an intensive course. It felt symbolic. I wasn't just moving on from the past, I was building something solid out of it. Each morning I studied at the same small cafe on 23rd Street. The staff learned my name. The barista started calling me counselor with a wink. For the first time in years, I felt proud when someone asked me what I did. I no longer said legal assistant. I said I was preparing to be a lawyer. My family didn't say much after the hearing. My mother sent a message 2 days later, asking if I wanted to come for Sunday dinner. I didn't reply. Trey called once and left a voicemail. He didn't apologize. He just said, "Guess you were serious about all this." I didn't respond to that either. It wasn't about punishing them. It was about reclaiming peace. I had spent too long chasing their approval, explaining myself to people who decided long ago that my feelings were inconvenient. I used to think I needed their support to feel strong. I don't anymore. What I needed was already in me. The day I passed the bar, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, phone in one hand, results on the screen, heart racing. And when I saw my name, I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I smiled, quietly. The way you do when something finally clicks into place. I was no longer the assistant in the background, quietly holding everything together. I was the one in front now, and I had earned every inch of it. Months later, I started working as a junior associate at a nonprofit legal center for women. On my first day, I met a client whose story mirrored mine almost exactly. Her voice shook. Her hands trembled. I handed her a pen and said, "Take your time. You're not alone." She looked up and nodded. That's when I understood the full weight of what happened. The courtroom was never just about me versus Denholm. It was about every person who has ever been told to stay quiet, to move on, to not make trouble. It was about showing what happens when you refuse to let silence win. I won the case. But the real victory was knowing I didn't let them break me. If this story resonated with you, or if you've ever felt dismissed, unseen, or unsupported, I hope you know this. Your voice matters. You don't need to shout to be heard. You just need to stand your ground and keep speaking the truth. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening. If you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and leave a comment if you've ever gone through something similar. I'd love to hear your story. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more real, powerful stories like this one. Because some stories aren't just told, they're felt. And this one changed everything.